Hello and welcome to the Marketing Times Analytics podcast. I'm your host, Alex Sofronas, and today I'm on with Jeni Golomb. Jeni, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me, Alex. I'm Jeni Golomb. As a former CMO and Harvard MBA, I founded Glassbreaker to guide women marketing leaders on their journey in the C-suite. I do personalized coaching and workshops to have them learn how to amplify their leadership potential, overcome challenges confidently, and deliver business results to achieve success. Sharing what I've learned over the last 20 plus years of my marketing career.
And how did you arrive at this mission? What was
Yeah.
that journey like for you?
My whole career, I've wanted to do something that was good for the world or society, in addition to being a good career for me. And I've sold things like gum and Slim Jims and diapers and cafeteria food, and it made for a good career, but it didn't give a lot back to the world. So last year, I had an opportunity to think about, what do I really want to do with my career, right? I have been CMO at a couple different organizations, and what do I want to do next? And I thought, what's really important to me? And that's gender equity in the workplace. So I decided to start Glassbreaker and help guide women to achieve the success that I was able to achieve in my career.
What is gender equity? How is that measured?
The World Economic Forum just came out last month and said, at the current rate of change in the United States, we will not have gender equity in the workplace until 5 generations from now. So my great granddaughter might have an opportunity to have gender equity in the workplace. What does that mean? That means equal opportunity for promotions, being seen similarly in the workplace, making sure that there are accommodations for things that women need, maternity leave, without having that negatively impact women's careers.
5 generations.
That's why I started Glassbreaker, because I need to do something to help shorten that gap, because that's just not acceptable.
So tell us about how you're doing that. What are the sort of things you're doing with that can help close this gap?
My long-term vision is to work with companies to help them make changes internal to the system so that they can change their culture, their practices, their policies to make it easier to have gender equity in the workplace. That's a longer term vision, not quite there yet. I'm starting with, how can I help women navigate the system the way that it is, in order for more women to be successful, get to the top, and hopefully drive some top down change. So for me, that looks like one-on-one coaching with female executives. It's women who are trying to get promoted and just need that little boost of confidence to help them get to the next level. Coaching women who are already at the top level and went, oh crap, like I'm here. How can I make sure that I deliver now? And again, giving them that little boost of confidence they need to be successful in their roles. It's doing workshops for different ERGs at companies and helping women learn the skills they need, up level themselves to be more successful in their careers. Starting there and from the bottom up, and hopefully someday working from the top down as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely seems important to provide those kinds of resources. How did you had a really impressive educational career story. How does that factor into this? What were the sort of things you learned that helped you with this new chapter in your life?
Great question. I have an engineering degree undergrad from the University of Michigan, worked as an engineer for a couple of years at Motorola. I was the only woman in a department of more than 200 engineers. So that really gave me a good idea of what it means to be in the minority from a gender perspective. Went and got an Harvard MBA, as I mentioned, and started my career in marketing from there. Certainly, there are more women in marketing than there are in electrical engineering, but what I still found is that while the junior ranks are filled with more women, the higher you work up, the more there are men. And that's really the gender barrier that we need to break from a marketing perspective to ensure there are equal gender numbers. What I do, not only is it executive coaching, but also because I've been a marketer for more than 20 years, there's an advisory perspective as well. I'm a sounding board for my clients to say, here's my brand plan, or here's my strategy, or here's what I'm working on. It's someone to bounce ideas around with, from someone who's been in your shoes for the last couple of decades.
I have a devil's advocate question. Why do we need to have equal representation at the top ranks in marketing between genders?
We know that women have a lot of skills that make them, in a generalized perspective, very strong leaders in terms of emotional intelligence, empathy, and these sorts of things. Men have really held the keys to the castle for far too long. Even at Harvard Business School, women were not allowed to be a student at Harvard Business School until 1965, which is just absolutely crazy. And we have a big gap to fill to make up the ranks. I think that women and men should have equal opportunity to be successful in the workplace.
And it sounds like equal outcome, that they're both ending up in the same place. Is that right?
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, I want to shift a little bit. I'm glad we talked about that because it sounds like this is a very important piece of this story is the sort of impact, the greater impact that you're having on the marketing ecosystem. But I want to take a step back and ask more about your experience with marketing and some of the things that you did as a CMO. That's such an important role and a very high level and strategic role. So I'm curious, what was that career path like to get to a CMO?
Started as an electrical engineer, decided I wanted to be in marketing probably 6 weeks on the job. I looked around and went, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. I went and got an MBA to make the transition into marketing. When I graduated back in 2003, the economy was not great. It was just post-internet bubble burst. And it was really hard for an electrical engineer with no marketing experience to get a job in marketing. I coined something that I call the theory of concentric circles. And it's really, what is that bullseye of what are you targeting to do for your job? For me, my dream job was to be a brand manager at a big CPG company in downtown Chicago. That was the dream. If I could be a brand manager, how amazing would that be? Unfortunately, no one wanted me to even be an assistant brand manager at a big CPG company in downtown Chicago. So that was my bullseye. And then I had to release my constraints until I could get a job that was maybe a stepping stone to where I wanted to go. So I said, maybe it doesn't have to be Chicago. No one wanted to hire me. I said, maybe it doesn't have to be a big CPG company. Maybe it can be a small CPG company. No one wanted to hire me. And then I said, maybe it doesn't need to be CPG. It can be something else. And that's when I got a job working at Daimler Chrysler as assistant brand manager on Dodge Neon and Dodge Viper and working on things like that. Not exactly what I wanted to do, but that was okay. I learned so much about marketing in my role there that I was then able to translate that into a job working for a smaller CPG company called Marisont. They make Equal, the sugar substitute. I worked there for 2.5 years and learned to walk the CPG walk and talk the CPG talk. Then I went to interview for ABM positions with the big CPG companies. True story, on the same day, I had offers from Wrigley, PepsiCo, and Unilever and had my choice of those companies. I chose Wrigley, the gum company. That was my dream right there in the Wrigley building on Michigan Avenue. And I worked there for 7 or 8 years, worked my way up to senior brand manager and learned so much about marketing at that company because gum is not a necessity for anybody, right? You only need to buy gum if you feel like you need to buy gum. And what can we do as marketers to make sure that you are buying the category, penetrating the category, driving frequency, and so forth? So it is all about consumer marketing. I learned so much in my time there. I worked on Juicy Fruit. I was on the team that launched 5 Gum. It was brand new at that time. I worked on Altoids, the seasonal business, Lifesavers, and so forth. And then had an opportunity to start to work my way up the ladder more. I went to a smaller candy company called Farley's, subsequently bought by Ferrara. I was a director of marketing there. After that business was sold, I became a director of marketing at Conagra, where I worked on the salty snacks business, Slim Jim, David Sunflower Seeds, and so forth. From there, I became a senior director at Kimberly-Clark, leading the Huggies diapers business globally. And then from there, became chief marketing officer at Daisy Brand Sour Cream, where I worked for a handful of years. Finally, I was leading North America marketing at a company called Sodexo. This is my first foray outside of CPG. It's outsourced food service, college cafeterias, hospital cafeterias, corporate cafeterias, something like that. I was there for the last 3 years until I quit and started Glassbreaker.
I want you to ask yourself a question. How much of the data that your business collects is actually used to drive contextual marketing campaigns? The capabilities of the marketing industry are evolving rapidly, and that's great news for businesses. More data is becoming available at increasing levels of granularity, and that data can be used to create better marketing campaigns that better resonate with your key audiences and increase customer conversion rates. Marketing tactics are becoming more focused and contextual, which is bridging the gap between B2B and B2C marketing. At the end of the day, we're marketing to individuals, whether they're buying on behalf of a business or whether they're buying a product or service for their home. My name is Alex, and I'm an expert in data, analytics, and direct marketing. I've managed over $70 million in media spend, over $10 million in agency fees, and I have a proven track record in lowering cost per sale in direct marketing, digital media, and paid search campaigns. I use data and analytics to dive into campaign performance, identify growth opportunities, and action on those insights to deliver business results. I've worked at companies like IBM and DirecTV, where I've leveraged LTV analytics and customer insights to identify profitable groups of customers and drive demand amongst those customer groups. The secret is in de-averaging campaign and audience performance, understanding the components of profitability and tying that together with audience segmentation. So the question is, are you using the right data to maximize your marketing potential? Grab time with me to learn how you can get the most sales out of your marketing efforts. Thanks for listening. You moved around between companies. I'm curious, how long did you spend in the marketing world before you became a CMO? How long did that path take?
Total, math, 13 years, working my way up from assistant brand manager to chief marketing officer. Another thing that's going in my book is this unexpected path to CMO. What worked was changing companies. Every time I changed a company, it was another little bump in title to get to the C-suite. Sometimes it was by choice. Sometimes it was Conagra shutting down the frozen foods business and laying off 4,000 people. So you're part of that, right? But ultimately, I feel like that accelerated my path up the career ladder to CMO.
That's really interesting. You mentioned your book. Tell us more about what the main purpose or the main value that you're hoping to deliver through your book is.
It is the unexpected lessons that I've learned the hard way over the course of my career and how to help junior, mid-career folks learn from my experience to help them navigate and accelerate their journey to the C-suite.
I'm definitely curious, what's an example of a challenge that you had to face, and what was sort of the lesson you extracted from that you wish to share?
There's many of them. One example would be working for a family business. How do you manage the business owner who maybe is not experienced in marketing? Marketing is a function that everyone thinks they're the expert in, right? If you're the CFO, you think you're an expert in finance and marketing, right? You're in sales, you're an expert in sales and marketing. Everyone thinks they're an expert in marketing. In reality, marketing is both an art and a science. And there's so much to learn about how to be a really successful marketer. It's not just N of one, I think that commercial looks good and that's the path that we need to go, which is the advice you typically get IT guy, right? And my IT guy has strong opinions on what my marketing should look like. One lesson I learned is how to manage that perspective. Everyone thinks they're an expert in marketing. When I say this to my clients or prospective clients, they're like, oh, yes, they're always dealing with this. So how do we manage dealing with a senior leadership C-suite who all thinks that they're experts in your function when, again, it's quite a technical skill.
Yeah, I mean, that is tough. Marketing's probably one of the most political functions in a business because of that blend between art and science. There's a certain amount of gut instinct that it requires, certain amount of data, and it's a constantly shifting balance between the two, depending on what is available to you as the marketing leader. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of debates or discussions about directions to go, and oftentimes it's when you bring in the data that things settle down a little bit and it gets less political.
Alex, it's not just the data, which is important, but it's also bringing in the voice of the consumer, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the CFO thinks or the IT guy thinks, or even what I think. It matters what our consumer thinks. And part of the biggest part of the job of marketing is to be the voice of the consumer inside the organization. Maybe that looks like doing ethnographics with your consumer and getting videos of them saying exactly what they need and want, so that you can bring that to life for the rest of the functions within the organization and really galvanize the organization around the consumer's needs.
Do you have examples of bringing in those consumer insights to help make a decision?
When I was at Daisy Brand, lots of experts in marketing in that organization, and we were launching cottage cheese singles that had fruit on top and cottage cheese in the little bowl, and really trying to figure out how to position that, who's eating it, and so forth. And ultimately, we did ethnographics with our consumers and found an interesting niche: feeding toddlers. Cottage cheese is a perfect food for toddlers because they can't choke. It's very high in protein, high in calcium, and so forth. Good for baby. And it's something that moms can let baby eat without having to watch them to make sure that they're not choking. So we did tons of ethnographics with moms and toddlers on their hips and putting them into the high chair and watching them serve this cottage cheese. And we made all these videos in a little montage that I brought to the next department head meeting and shared it. It was just this big aha moment when the consumer is saying to you what they need versus me saying it or the data showing it, having it brought to life. And from that, we were able to create a campaign specifically around marketing to moms of toddlers. And where are moms of toddlers? They're on Pinterest. We did YouTube ads and things like that, so we could find moms where they are with their toddlers.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I needed extra money to do that. So I guess that's the important takeaway, right? Like, I wanted money to do a toddler campaign. And when I brought it to life, they went, okay, here's some extra money to go after this audience because we can see how important it is.
I think that's a big part of marketing that can be a little uncomfortable to talk about sometimes. This incentive to grow the marketing budget. For some reason, people tend to rally around that. I remember previously I would have some people I worked with that were like, we're going to make this campaign so successful that we get a much bigger marketing budget next year, drive more value. And it seems like that's this underpinning of the way that some marketers think is, how do we maximize the budget? How do you approach that thought? Are you looking at maximizing the budget? How do you see the revenue generated and the cost coming from marketing within the greater context of the business? Should marketers be seeking to increase the budget? If they are, what are the metrics that should be looked at to justify a larger budget? How should marketers be thinking about budget in general?
Great question. When I first started in marketing, we didn't have nearly the number of metrics available to us as we do present day. Then it was more trying to be persuasive about why we would need more money. Every company I've worked for, with maybe the exception of Chrysler, had a lot of money for advertising. My budget has been small. My budget has been cut, and I am expected to do more with less. That has been par for the course over the entire 20-year period that I've been doing things. That has taught me how to be very scrappy. And sometimes, as in the cottage cheese toddler example, sometimes you're like, I would really love to do this, but I don't have the money. And it is all about creating the business case for why this would be a good investment. Because the number one thing is, you do not want marketing to be seen as a cost center. You want marketing to be seen as a revenue generator, and everything should have positive ROI on what we're doing. Not always everything hits, that's for sure, but balanced out to be a positive ROI across the board. Would I love to get more money? Sure. Have I made cases for more money? Absolutely. But that is not my primary goal. My primary goal has always been, how do we deliver business results? And I think that's the really interesting thing about CPG marketing is, most places, the marketers own the P&L. And when you own the P&L, you are laser focused. How am I going to deliver top line, bottom line on that P&L? So you understand, if you spend more money here, it's going to have an impact here. And how are you going to make sure that you're delivering that bottom line profit? I think that, again, Sodexo doesn't do it that way. Marketing doesn't own the P&L. I know other sort of B2B companies, marketing doesn't own the P&L. I think the challenge is then marketing becomes seen as a cost center versus a revenue generator. For me, it is always, for every dollar I spend, being really focused on what am I going to get for this, trying to optimize my working versus my non-working, and making sure that we're delivering positive ROI.
So speaking of ROI, it can be a challenge. Attribution can be a big challenge for marketers. Do you recommend, let's say a business is just starting their marketing and they don't have attribution set up? How do you attribute revenue to different tactics, especially in the upper funnel?
Yeah, it is very challenging. The easiest way to do it is when you have a big company like Daisy Brand and you're spending tens of millions of dollars on TV vehicles, you're able to do a marketing mix analysis and they tell you exactly, here's your ROI on this, here's your ROI on that. And that is obviously far easier than when you're just starting out and smaller budgets and how do things work and so forth. I think, again, the digital age we have now versus what I had back when I was an ABM make it a little bit easier to show, to have numbers supporting what's happening. It's really hard to tie that red thread back to revenue, but again, focusing on what does that revenue number look like? So trying to keep that close eye on sales versus what you're spending on marketing and making the connections where you can. I don't have a silver bullet for that, unfortunately. I think it's very difficult. Do you have good ideas on how to do that?
I think it's pretty similar to what you said. The marketing mix model in today's age, and we're recording this in 2024, could be different next year. It's practical and easy to get behind if it's built correctly. People have to agree on how it's calculated and the data it's based off of. But assuming that's all built out, I think the MMM model is really top tier in terms of what can be used to understand the relative impact of different tactics, especially in the upper funnel. I would say it's important to try different attribution methodologies and see what the results are to understand. I don't think you have to use the same attribution for each tactic. As long as you have one common attribution for all the tactics, then you can look at each tactic with a second layer of attribution for some tactics that may be specifically volume drivers and are not meant to have incrementality or generate net new people, prospects or customers. And that's okay, as long as the business is aware that it's not generating net new customers. You would just look at a more direct attribution, probably more in the lower funnel. But you always have to have some common link between all of the tactics, and that would help for things like budget planning between the different tactics.
Yep.
It's fun, honestly. We have so much data in today's age, and more so than data, we have models. And models have really transformed marketing from guessing to educated guesses. We're getting better with it. I'm curious, in your background, what are some of the tactics that you've tried that worked really well, and what are some tactics that didn't work so well?
What always works really well is if you start with your target consumer is and work your way up from there. So many times other departments say, oh, we have this idea that consumers do blah, 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 whatever it is. And it may not be right. And it may not be true. It may not be data based. It may just be their opinion. I am constantly touting, anyone who's worked for me can tell you, starting with the consumer insight, finding that universal truth that connects them to your product so they look at you and go, wow, you really get me. You understand me. This is exactly what I needed, this product at this moment in my life, and you found me. When you can make that type of connection, that will drive purchase every single time. And then, of course, your product needs to deliver so you can drive repeat as well. But when you make that kind of connection, it will absolutely drive purchase, drive sales, drive repeat. A great example of how I did this, working on Daisy Sour Cream. Sour cream is a product heavily used by Mexican consumers, specifically Mexicans. If you look at other Latin American countries, their sour cream usage is minimal to none, but Mexicans, heavy sour cream users. And so for the first time ever, based upon data that we got when I started working there, I did some analysis and understood the Hispanic consumer, and specifically Mexican consumers. I decided we wanted to try to reach our consumers directly. and did a lot of work to understand who they are and dive below the surface. I always call consumer insights like an iceberg. A data point is just the tip of the iceberg. That's what you can see above the water. But the real iceberg is huge and everything that's below the surface. And that's where insights live, below the data point, under the surface. We spoke with so many Hispanic consumers, did a ton of research, and learned that there are 4 things that Mexican consumers were really passionate about. And we call them the 4 F's: family, faith, food, and football. And of course, football being soccer, right? And for those 4 things, man, our Mexican consumers were really passionate about. Now, faith, we weren't going to touch. That wasn't something we were going to do. But the other 3, family, food, and football, how can we pull these things that our consumers care so much about and help insert Daisy sour cream? Long story short, we did a sponsorship of the Mexican national soccer team. And interesting point about the Mexican national soccer team, they have as many or more fans in the United States as they do in Mexico. And the fans in the United States actually have more money per person than they do in Mexico as well. And the Mexican men's national soccer team actually plays more of their games in the United States than they do in Mexico, because it's a revenue driver for them. So when we sponsored that team, unlike other sports in the United States, you sponsor my team, that's cool. Mexican national soccer team, you sponsor my team, I'm there for you. There's a 2-way, wow, you care about me, I care about you. And we were able to do really cool things. We got some of their best players on the men's national soccer team, and we created these little videos where the player and his mom would be in the kitchen making some of their favorite recipes. Of course, those recipes featured Daisy sour cream, and it was behind the scenes of the player and his mom, something that all of the Mexican national soccer team fans wanted to see and ate up. And that drove our sales with our Mexican consumers tremendously. We did in-store components to support that. We did giveaways with tickets and so forth. And it was extremely successful for us. We continued that for the next couple of years. All of it with the underpinning of, what do our consumers really care about? Food, family, and place. So bad experience is when you don't start with the insight. A bad experience is when it's like, hey, the boss wants to do this, or someone came up with that idea, or we have the opportunity to do free, whatever that looks like. If it's not related to what your consumer wants, it will fail every time.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're really stressing the point of listening to the consumer. And that's so important. Marketing is all about understanding people and what drives them to make certain decisions and not make certain decisions, and communicating in a way that they understand, that satisfies what they're looking for and makes them interested in the product. If you're not listening to them, it's going backwards, right? The story has to start from the consumer. That's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that.
Spot on.
So speaking about that football team, I'm curious, how did you arrive at that? Did it start with a gut instinct of, maybe this team would be a good place for us to sponsor, and so I'll look into data about their games played in the US and what they can offer us? Mm-hmm. How does something like that get initiated?
So we first did a brand equity study. That's when we found out we had this real spike with our Mexican consumers. We dug deeper into that and understood food, football, family, and faith. And then when we said, okay, we want to go after this football component, we reached out to the Mexican national soccer team and said, we're interested in doing something with you. What's going on? They were the ones who brought the data to us on the number of games played in the US, income per household for the US versus Mexican, all of these sorts of things that really solidified our desire to work with them. And then we were able to negotiate a partnership that made sense, that we could afford, and also still get materials and creative that we needed in order to be in front of our consumers and drive the business. We didn't just want a logo on the field. That wasn't going to be good enough for us. We really wanted to make sure that we were driving engagement with all of the different pieces and media that we were using.
Speaking of engagement, I'm curious how you would measure, and you don't have to say how you exactly measured it, but how would you measure or recommend somebody something like a sponsorship like that? Are you looking at the traffic for the posts related to the sponsorship? And how do you really capture the full story of the impact?
Great question. It was a lot of cobbling things together. Here's the number of views on each of our videos. Here's the number of people who participated in our sweepstakes to win tickets to a particular game. Of all of those, the one that was most impactful is at Walmart stores that are in bigger Hispanic areas. How did our sales do there? They were through the roof. So it was really easy in that regard. It's not total sales, and maybe not all related to the Mexican national soccer team. But we launched this Mexican national soccer team program, and then our sales in heavily Hispanic neighborhoods went through the roof. So it felt like there was a connection there.
I'm curious, what is the actual thing happening in the mind of that consumer that's driving them to go to the Walmart and get the sour cream?
They were already eating sour cream, most likely. We know that Mexican consumers over-index on sour cream usage. When you look at the sour cream category, there's really two big players, Daisy sour cream and private label. So Walmart Great Value brand or whatever store you're in. And seemingly you could say sour cream is sour cream and they're the same. Great Value is $1 less than Daisy. So I'm going to go for the Great Value because who cares? And our job as the marketing team was to convince folks to say, no, there actually is a big difference for Daisy versus the private label brand. Now, some of our advertising focused on we use only clean ingredients, there's no fillers, or we have higher quality ingredients. You can taste the difference if you taste the two side by side. There is a difference there. So some of our more Gen Pop advertising, but then specific to the Mexican national soccer team sponsorship, it was more of creating, this is a brand for me. I identify with this brand because they're reflecting back to me who I am and what I care about. And if this star player on the Mexican national soccer team is cooking with his mom and he's using Daisy sour cream, then that is clearly a brand for me also, and creating that emotional connection. And it's an emotional connection for sure. We didn't say this is cleaner ingredients or this is better. We just said, hey, this guy uses it and this is a person you're really passionate about. And we created the emotional connection that way.
Very interesting. It's so interesting how marketing works when you really dive into it. There's different methods to connect with a consumer and to convince them. What are some other mechanisms that marketers can use to convince consumers to consider them?
It's almost an endless list of what you can do, and it depends on your objective. From an awareness perspective, just getting folks to be aware of whatever that point of difference is that you're trying to talk about. And maybe it's clean ingredients. When I worked on Altoid Smalls, it was like we solved this problem for you where Altoids was in this super big, dusty tin that was hard to travel with. And then we created Altoid Smalls that are not dusty, they're not chalky, they fit in your pocket in this little tin, they're super portable, and just making folks aware that solution existed, right? How do you drive awareness of that? Once you get them to the store, you need them to remember to purchase you once they're in the store. So are you doing shelf danglers? When we launched Daisy Squeeze, the squeezable sour cream, which was amazing, and one of the top new items in the grocery store out of like 40,000 items, we were like number 10 or something that year. We did cross-category signage. So we did shelf talks at the taco shell aisle or near the avocados where we were able to go, hey, don't forget your sour cream, this new squeezy sour cream. It's going to be right over there in your dairy case. But it's also finding your consumers where they are. Is that I mentioned the cottage cheese toddlers, those moms were on Pinterest. We went to Pinterest at that time. Talking pins was just newly out. So we were one of the first brands to do a talking pin where the little baby videos and the baby crawled over to the other Pinterest window. And so it really drew attention as you were scrolling through Pinterest and got moms to look. It's endless. There's still, of course, traditional media to some extent. It's obviously changed tremendously, but there's TV, there's print, there's out of home. Obviously, YouTube ads have changed things tremendously as well. It's really hard to narrow down. You just have to pick, what is your objective? Where is my consumer? And how am I going to connect the two?
Yeah, I love that. There's so much creative thinking and problem solving in marketing because each product and company should have its own formula or recipe for how they're going to go to market and differentiate themselves. Would you agree? There shouldn't be companies using the same playbook because ensuring that they're losing a certain amount of sales that could be coming to them.
I'll give you an example, Alex, and I'm not going to name names to protect the company. A company that I worked at has a competitor that is number one in the category. The company I worked at was number two, sometimes number three, depending on the data and what you were looking at. This company I worked at was hell bent on doing the exact same thing that company number one was doing. I spent a good portion of my time trying to convince senior leadership that was the exact wrong thing to do, because we were not going to outsell someone already known in the marketplace as the best at this. They had more money, more experience, more clients. And I came up with this plan to go, hey, here's how we're going to be our version of what this looks like. And we're going to go around them. Here's where they're strong. We're not going to compete on their strong side. Here's where they're weak. Let's compete on their weak side at something that we can own specific to us in order to be successful. It was a great plan. And unfortunately, very stubborn leadership at that organization. So they never enacted it. This company that I'm talking about, at one point in time, they were number one. And the company that is currently number one was just a little baby company. And these guys eked their way up. And this company keeps doing what they are always doing. And their sales continue to plummet, because doing the same thing isn't going to work. You have to find your unique point of differentiation, find your consumer and how those connect, and then make the connection between the two.
You mentioned something very interesting that I've been thinking about recently, which is how does marketing strategy change as a business grows? So the two stages that I'm curious about is the first stage is the company has very few customers, very few marketing people. And then the second stage is the company has a lot of customers, a lot of leads, a lot of awareness, but is now trying to drive a lot of sales through marketing now that they've established themselves a little bit more. Yeah. How does marketing differ from that stage 1 to stage 2?
Yeah, it's just about understanding where you are in the funnel, right? In that stage 1, you're in awareness. If you don't have clients and customers yet, the first thing you need to do is make people aware of what you do. Even when I started Glassbreaker last year, the number one thing that I had to do was make people aware that Glassbreaker exists. Here's what I'm doing, who I want to work with, and let's make connections to find those people and draw awareness. So when you're in that stage 1, it's really about understanding very clearly who your target consumer is, right? For me at Glassbreaker, my target consumer is women who are in that mid director VP level who are trying to get promoted and they're just hitting a barrier. How can I help give them that boost that they need to get to the next level? Or again, I just got promoted and oh crap, I just got promoted. How do I deliver now? Like, I'm very clear on who my ideal client is, and then driving awareness with my ideal client that I even exist. That's your phase 1. For your phase 2, you've got some clients, you've got some marketing people, but you need more. Now you're further down in the funnel. Now you're in that conversion phase of how do you get them from awareness to consideration to conversion, right? And again, it is very much understanding who those clients or your consumers are and what they need to get to purchase. More often than not, particularly in consumer goods, it changes a little bit in B2B, but not as much as you would think. It's that emotional connection. It's that you understand me, you are a brand for me, I am going to purchase. A lot of times in B2B, organizations think that we're dealing with a business here. It's very rational. It's very logical. We're going to show them that we're the lowest price or we're the best value. But at the end of the day, you are still marketing to a human being, that business organization. And many times there are emotional decisions made by the people inside a business. So making that emotional connection, whether you're B2B or B2C, is absolutely critical to driving conversion. For me with Glassbreaker, I meet with prospective clients. They understand me, what I'm all about, how I can help them boost their career. There's that emotional connection with, oh, Jeni gets me. Jeni's been in my shoes. Jeni struggled to get promoted. Here's how Jeni did it. She's going to help me. She understands me, and we're going to work together to reach my end goal.
You mentioned B2B and B2C. I'm curious, what are some of the differences in how marketing is structured between the two? I agree with you that it is really similar. There are differences with the level of data that we have. It's all super personalized. Even the consumer marketing is super targeted. In the past, we didn't have the data or the targeting ability to do that. So I think it's B2C moved towards B2B. No, I don't think B2B moved very much because it's always been much more tailored. But I'm curious, what do you see as some of the differences between the two?
For me, the biggest difference is being a consumer-led business. At least the companies that I've worked at in B2C, CPG, were very consumer focused. How are you going to get someone to pay an extra dollar for your tub of sour cream versus the private label sour cream? Or how are you going to get someone to pick up a pack of gum as they're going through the checkout? Being very, really starting with the consumer. B2B tends to be either more operations driven or more sales driven, depending on the company, and they lose track of the consumer. Just in my experiences, the B2B companies that I've worked with, either as clients or Sodexo and so forth, they're less focused on the consumer. At Sodexo, I worked to implement a B2B 4C perspective, right? Our clients are the universities, the hospitals, and so forth who need or outsource food service. But our customers, our consumers, are the ones who are eating at the cafeterias. It's the college students who are getting the meal plans and eating 3 meals a day there for an entire year, or the hospital staff who is doing inpatient meals or in the cafeteria for guests and visitors. And how are we delivering on their needs? If I have happy college students who are like, man, I love my college cafeteria. This food is so good. I love eating here. And in fact, it's so good that when I'm a sophomore and I'm a junior, I'm going to keep getting a meal plan because I want to keep coming back. That is going to create happy clients because they're not listening to these college students complain and moan about how crappy the cafeteria food is. My students are all happy. They have great food. So now I go to Sodexo and I say, I'm super happy with what you have because all of my students are really happy. And that creates this virtuous cycle to say, I really like you. I'm going to continue to work with you. Let's be strategic partners. How can we continue to grow? And it's this whole virtuous cycle. Versus if you just think about the client and what does the client need, and you're forgetting the consumer piece, it can be more difficult to create these longer lasting relationships because you're missing out on what the client is trying to do, and that's deliver for their consumers.
I love that. And I want to ask about how you weigh a marketing budget towards the decision makers in B2B marketing versus that end consumer and making them aware of it. If you were Sodexo, how much of the marketing budget would go towards the people making the decision to sign on Sodexo, a food company, versus the people consuming the product? How would you think about distributing the marketing resources between the two?
Yes, it's a great question. It's not necessarily about having end consumers be aware, like, oh, Sodexo, they're a great company. It's more about if I'm a student at the University of Denver, how can I get those students to sign up for meal plans? They don't necessarily need to know it's Sodexo, but how do I get them to sign up for meal plans or eat in the cafeteria more frequently or use our robot food service delivery more frequently or to use our app and digital ordering more frequently so that we're driving usage amongst consumers, right? There's a share of wallet for your consumers, and they're either going to eat in the cafeteria or with one of our other dining services, or they're going to go up to Main Street and order at Chipotle. How do we get a bigger share of wallet internally? So then the question becomes the split between making sure we're capturing our fair share of wallet and then communicating to our clients and prospective clients to get them to understand Sodexo is your top food service provider for your needs. I think for me, it depends on the life cycle. So if it's a prospective client, we're spending all of our money going after the client and not thinking so much about the consumer. Once we have them as a client, we're still communicating with our client because we want to make sure we retain our client and make them happy. But then we also shift some of our budget to those end users as well to make sure we're capturing our share of wallet.
So it's almost like you're gamifying, or you're thinking about how do we drive a better experience for the end consumer, but you're not using marketing as the lever to do that. You're using the product and the way the product is configured and brought to market. Is that right?
Yeah. Look, everyone knows the 5 P's of marketing, right? It is not just promotion, which is your marketing message that drives your business. It's also placement, making sure your product is where it is when they want it, positioning it in the right way. All of these things need to come together. Which levers are you going to pull to make it make sense for your consumer? For the Mexican men's national soccer team, that was obviously a promotion of how are we connecting it in your mind emotionally. But when I worked on Slim Jims, that business was in double-digit decline, and we were able to turn it around by doing a price decrease. We changed it. It was up to $1.20. We got it back down to $1. We were able to make the P&L work so that we could lower our price. So we priced it right back at $1. And then we also worked with all of our C-store partners to get better distribution. We created these new racks to make it much easier to shop a stick. So they weren't sit up vertically like this, they were laying horizontally. So between having the right price and having the right placement at distribution, those two things alone were able to turn our business around tremendously. Having the right product at the right price, at the right place. So really understanding what's happening with your business and your consumers that you need to change in order to influence purchase and be persuasive.
I love that. Jeni, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you chatting with me today.
Yeah, I always love talking marketing. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you, Jeni. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.